This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. And of course, a big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. No matter where you're farming, Canada, the US, or beyond, it is great to have you with us here today. It is Tuesday, and yesterday we had we didn't do a fresh show, but I hope you made it through the day. You had a great long weekend in here in May. I mean, May is kind of a weird long weekend for many farmers, for sure. I think that's one of the ones that probably least likely to be able to take it easy, because I've talked to a lot of you coming out of the weekend. It's like, oh, I was busy. It was busy. But hope you had a good time nonetheless. And it is Tuesday today, which means, and we didn't do a show yesterday, so we're going to be doing Agronomic Tuesday. Yeah, we're going to just shift today. Why not? Let's do it. Peter Pete Johnson will be here from Real Agriculture. Got a lot of stuff to discuss with Pete. And we'll also hear some audio from a recent Canola School episode with Rob MacDonald of BASF, one of their leads in agronomy research. He will talk about seeding depth and kind of that evaluation point of depth and population and some of the considerations as we look at some of the canola that has come out of the ground in parts of Western Canada. And we'll also have some time for the top ag news stories of the day. If you have any feedback on today's program, we would love to hear from you, of course. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I would also want to point out, when you do go to our YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe, please. We'd love to have you as a subscriber to our YouTube channel. You can also provide feedback by calling the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Many of you sent me emails over the weekend related to our coverage of the BSE crisis, and the reflections thereupon. So I really appreciate that. I'm trying to get back to all of them and reply to you. I really appreciate. And you know what? If you do have a thought, keep the emails coming. Just because the anniversary is passed doesn't mean we can't talk about it, reflect on it. And there's been some great points of view as well. So really do appreciate it. We'll try to get to some of those comments as the week progresses here, because some of them are so heartfelt. It's been pretty cool to have that feedback in my inbox. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to Peter Pete Johnson, who's standing by. You're listening to RealAg Radio.
We have the financial tool you're looking for. An advance payments program, Cash Advance from CCGA, is a low-cost farm financial tool that can help cover your spring working capital needs. Borrow your first $350,000 interest-free, with the rest at prime less 0.75%. Apply on over 50 commodities. Call our experienced team or visit ccga.ca. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on, Agronomic Tuesday. That's what we're rolling with here today. This segment's brought to you by Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. We're joined right now by RealAgriculture's resident agronomist. It is Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how are you doing?
I'm awesome, Sean. Like, what? You could hardly ask for a better spring seeding season than we have had. We had a 10-day run. Everybody was running out of gas. We got a gorgeous rain on Friday night, gave everybody Saturday off. Some people more than Saturday. Like, it depends on the area, but so at least Saturday, maybe even Saturday, Sunday off on the long weekend. And then now we've got another, looks like it, depends on the forecast, but maybe another 7 or another 10-day run to finish things up. Is like, holy snapping. How do you ask for anything better than that?
Yeah, no kidding. It's interesting as we try to get to the back end of planting and seeding, really, across the country. One of the big questions that I have had, Pete, and this is more of a Alberta, part of Saskatchewan issue, although the smoke has really moved across the country. I know that you're seeing even a bit of a haze in the sky where you are in the southwestern corner. Depending on the day and which way the wind's blowing, we're seeing like really high levels of smoke impacts and smoke being in the air. The air smells like a bloody campfire every day, Pete. In the worst case scenario, what does this mean for some of these crops that are just seeded or just out of the ground? What does it mean for it?
Yeah. Well, and so, Sean, it depends on the stage that the crop is at. But at the end of the day, we want rainfall, we want carbon dioxide, which we have, ubiquitously, and we want sunshine. Those are the three inputs. And so even here in southwestern Ontario, when I get up in the morning and I walk outside and it's clear, there's not a cloud in the sky, but I look up and the sky isn't the right color of blue. And you kind of go like, what is going on? And I'm not a weather meteorologist. I know one day there we definitely had the smoke, the jet stream brought it down over southwestern Ontario. And that day, wow, we really had the sunlight impacted. But even now, you just kind of go, are we getting less photosynthetically active radiation in that sunshine because of that smoke in the high atmosphere? In Alberta, man, it's hammering you hardcore. And in fact, now the firefighters are starting to say the smoke is so thick that it doesn't allow the sun to get through. And so that's keeping it cooler, which is reducing the risk of forest fires because the temperature isn't as high. Well, we don't want really high temperatures, but we want that sunshine. So look at, if the crop is still in the ground, that doesn't matter very much because it's not photosynthesizing. But as soon as it gets out of the ground, it needs that sunlight. The more sunlight it gets, the more photosynthetically active radiation you have, the better that crop will do. And so I used to say when I gave presentations that I had never, ever seen where head size, the size of the head in a wheat crop, was the yield limiting factor in wheat, that the head was always big enough that it became fertility in the head that mattered. Of course, we set the head size at about the 4 to 5 leaf stage of that wheat crop. Same with corn, kind of 5 to 6 leaf in corn, but it's right when we change from vegetative to reproductive growth. If you have spring wheat that you seeded in Alberta and you got it in early, you got it in March or in April, and it's hitting the 5 leaf stage and it's not getting any sunshine, you will have too small a head. It happened when we had the Fort McMurray fires. Yeah, it happened in northern Saskatchewan because there was so much smoke that went over northern Saskatchewan for such a long period of time that I now can't say that I've never seen head size limit wheat yields, because it did in Saskatchewan with the Fort McMurray fires. So it depends. Like with canola, canola's not flowering. It will slow down the growth. It won't get as big a plant, but it's got lots of time to make it up. With spring cereals, if that's when, or corn, if they're setting their head size now, that's bad. With winter wheat, here in Ontario, winter wheat is starting to head out. Man, if your winter wheat is at that stage and it pollinates and doesn't have sunshine, you are just going to get royally roasted, man, from a yield perspective, because green through grain fill, sunshine through grain fill, that's what really drives yields. And so every crop's different, but the smoke is going to have an impact, almost guaranteed.
Curious what kind of impact some of the smoke in the air would have on some of the insects. Right? Like, does it bother them? Like, and obviously like when I think of lack of sunlight for some, that might be advantageous for them. But I'm curious if the smoke, are grasshoppers bothered by the smoke in the air? I have zero clue. Do you have any idea?
So what I will say, Sean, is that if the crop is growing slowly, insect development is heat driven. Very few insects are driven by photoperiod. And even if they were, we're still getting the photoperiod. The sun still rises and it gets brighter, even with the smoke. So if the temperature is warm and that the insects are developing and the crop is growing slower, think about flea beetles. What's the best way to beat flea beetles? Get that canola up and going fast so that it outgrows the damage of the flea beetles. Well, now we have all these flea beetles. And if the crop is growing more slowly because it has less photosynthetic radiation, it's photosynthesizing less. So it just kind of slows down, because what else can it do? Man, those flea beetles are just likely to hammer it even that much worse. So I don't know about their respiratory system, if the smoke bothers them that way. Their life cycle is pretty short, so I doubt they get cancer from it like, you might worry in a human. But boy, from a crop perspective, I think it's all bad.
Now, also weather related, last week, Ontario had some really chilly nights. We talked about this last week on the show. What were some of the final impacts as you look at some of the crops out there?
Sean, we're still waiting to see, but I'm astounded. It looks like we didn't get near the amount of damage that we expected. And you normally would say if it's -2 for 2 hours, you're done. We had weather stations, Warren Schneckenberger, Clark Aiken, so Warren's in Ottawa, Clark's in Sarnia, and they were talking about grass temperatures, soil temperatures, down as low as -7. And Johnson, the agronomist, says, you're cooked, baby. You got soybeans up, they are dead. You got canola in flower. It's really in tough shape. It's going to drop all those flowers. It's going to drop any of the early pods that are set at the bottom of the plant. We had winter barley that was in boot stage. It should be done. And so far, it looks like a lot of those crops have tolerated that better than we expected, whether the time frame was too short. There was the odd picture on Twitter where, the one grower actually from Chatham, Kent, tweeted me a picture where I think he'd seeded them on April 30th. And he had a picture of one where the soybean plant was clearly dead below the cotyledons. You're dead below the cotyledons. That's called replant. So I'm not going to say there's no damage. And I mean, it's still really too early to tell for sure on the winter canola, on the winter barley. But boy, right now, I would say things took it way better than we expected. And Ben Hill from Ottawa tweeted out a picture of his soybeans emerging. He says, planted in the ground for 30 plus days, a whole bunch of frost, a big crust to push through. And guess what? Here they are. They're coming up. And it's kind of like, wow. It is just so hard to predict. And I hope I'm right that it's not as bad as we feared. But we won't quite give up, or we won't quite close the book on potential frost injury quite yet.
And you also got some rain.
Oh, growers just the most gorgeous rain you could ever order up, Sean. So Friday night, late Friday, depends on where you were at, it started to rain. A lot of growers, talked to one large grower. He finished corn at 11:26 a.m. on Friday. Started raining for him about 4:30 p.m. So talk about just getting done in the nick of time. But we had a soft, gentle rain all Friday night. Growers anywhere from a quarter inch to as much as 2 inches. The people that got 2 inches got a thunderstorm or two, but most areas kind of 4/10 to 7/10. Gentle all night, cloudy all day Saturday, so that it soaked in. It didn't evaporate off. It didn't cause a crust. The crops where we had planted them a little bit shallow, or we needed that moisture to get them up, I think they got it. It doesn't get much better than that. If I could have ordered it, Sean, that's what I would have ordered.
Nice. I like when Pete gets what he wants.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. It's mostly the big pounding thunderstorm, but no, right now things are sweet here in most of Ontario.
Yeah, I know we're in Lethbridge, where our RealAg studio is. We would take some rain, and not much in the forecast. It's been pretty short, but it looks like parts of Saskatchewan could get some rain this week, which is makes me a little bit jealous. To be honest with you. Things feel a little bit spotty so far. And we've been hearing on the Farmer Rapid Fire too, there's a lot of variability, right? Like you just can't say, hey, Saskatchewan's in great shape. There are some spots that definitely needing some moisture. And of course, we already talked about some of the smoke in the air. That's forest fire driven. I'll tell you what, there's parts of Alberta that could really use some moisture. So let's hope that happens here this week, and hopefully the forecast changes. I didn't see a lot in the forecast, which is quite unfortunate.
Well, I'm ordering that gorgeous half-inch rain for all of Alberta and Saskatchewan and everywhere. Whoever needs it, I'm ordering that, Sean. Whether my order will get filled or not, but I'm putting in the order for you. Yeah,
like I see for Edmonton this week, like a little bit, like 3.5 mils on the weekend. That doesn't do very much when it comes to fighting a fire. Yeah. So
that is not enough.
That is not enough. Okay, Pete, let's take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio, of course, on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on a special edition of Agronomic Tuesday. Why not? Hey, are you looking to simplify your sulfur solution on your farm? Get BioSul Premium Plus from GFL Ag, the unique combination of compost and elemental sulfur that provides a cost-efficient, logistically friendly, agronomically sound, long-term, and environmentally friendly sulfur solution for your farm. Learn more at gflagra.com. That's gflagri.com. We are joined here by Peter Pete Johnson, talking all things agronomy. Pete, we should also mention the wheat tour in Kansas last week. The wheat tour was on. And some really kind of, I'm not sure they were a surprise, but results as expected, not very good.
Yeah, really crappy. And hey, Sean, just before I go to the wheat tour, can I just say, you talked about sulfur there in the opening, and man, I still cannot believe it, but growers in Ontario where the sulfur was forgotten. What's the yield loss? I don't know. You get it on as quick as you can, but this sulfur thing on wheat, it's just real. So don't forget that. I got to throw that in quickly because I think since you and I last talked on Monday last week, I've had at least 12 people contact me with sulfur deficiency problems in their winter wheat crop here in Ontario.
Oh, yikes.
And so she's a sulfur year here, baby. And if you don't have enough, you better get enough on because it makes a massive, massive difference. Anyway, yeah, so the wheat tour, they are saying, the Kansas wheat tour, they ended up with a 30 bushel yield average prediction. It's kind of interesting because they do the counts. So they count heads, they count kernels, they count plants. Like they have a formula. But after they're done running the formula, they also ask the scouts, visually looking at this field, what's your prediction? And so on average, the formula said 30 bushels per acre. The scouts actually said 28 bushels per acre. You have to go back, I think it is, to 1964 to get a lower yield than that. And in 1957, actually, they had the record low at 20 bushels per acre. But it's just repeated drought after drought. They think there's going to be about 20% abandonment. They've gone from 8.1 million seeded acres. They think they're only going to harvest 6.6 million. There was a grower that tweeted out a picture, and he said he had the sprayer out there. He was spraying out, he said, my 45 bushel per acre wheat crop. And you could tell he was poking a bit of fun at the wheat tour because it didn't look like 45 bushel wheat crop to me, but that's what I guess the formula said. And it was poor enough. He was saying, I'm not harvesting it. Like, it's just so short. I don't even know if I can get the combine knife under the heads. And we're spraying it out. And if we get rain, we'll plant corn or soybeans or sorghum or something. If we don't get rain, it'll just go back to winter wheat this coming fall. So last year, by the way, the wheat tour, 2022, the prediction was 39.7 bushels per acre. This year at 30 bushels per acre. That is a massive, I don't know. It would just be hard to take, Sean. For a wheat guy like Wheat Pete, I would be having a lot of bad days in a row.
Yeah, I wonder what the abandoned acres will be. Like, when you've got that poor of a situation, mind you, they've got programming in place, right, where there will be a payout for that. Like you're switching into another crop. It's, really just terrible situation. And did you say 64? Was that the last time?
I think it was in the 1960s. I believe it was 1964, but I'd have to look again.
Pete,
I'm quite sure it was 1960.
That is a long time ago. That's before the last time the Leafs won the cup.
Wow, that's probably before you were born, even, Sean. I by the way, was born then. I have to admit. But anyway, that is a long time ago. It's and look at the advancement in genetics. Look at the advancement in technology, and we're still going to end up with a lower. Holy, that is. But it's it's not their first drought this year. It's drought number 3 or 4 or 5, I think, depending on area and there's just no subsoil moisture at all. It's pretty tough to grow a wheat crop.
Well, and I know this, like, we went through the drought of 21 in Western Canada, and, the impact on, there's the agricultural impact, like on the farmer, but you build that out. If the farmer's obviously financially impacted and the belts are really tightened and there's some hardship and all those kinds of things, it impacts the entire rural community, right? People aren't buying pickup trucks. They're not going to the restaurant. There's like, it is the whole community goes through a situation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So like all through the ag biz sector is going to get hit. I mean, you mentioned the equipment 100%, but it's not just the equipment. If I don't harvest a crop, I'm not likely buying any fertilizer. So there's that end is that I'm not going to be buying many herbicides, pesticides. Like, why would I? So you get that end of it. But then the other thing that they actually talked about, and I hadn't thought about this, but there's so little crop residue there that they're really worried they don't have enough cover, that if they do get rain, they will have enough residue on the surface to protect the soil surface and conserve that moisture. They're really concerned that even if we get rain and it's hot, we're going to get just tons of evaporation because we don't have the residue here to insulate that soil. So big impact on the entire economy in that area. Plus, it may last for a bit longer than you would expect, even when the rains come, because of soil health and residue cover and moisture retention and all those other things that you don't really think about until they happen to you. And it's like, wow, that's huge.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if we have a lot of listeners in Kenya. And if we do, please email me. I would love to hear from you. But I know you want to talk about corn populations and a gentleman by the name of David Jones. Talk about that.
So David Jones is someday I want to get to Kenya and meet David Jones and walk through his plots with him. He's a researcher. He's an agronomist, and he's on Twitter lots. And give him a follow. I mean, he is just a fun guy to follow. I follow him. And it just kind of twists your brain sideways. So he's in Kenya, and he tweets out pictures of corn population trials. And Woody Van Arco here in Ontario, says, well, what are your populations? What's your rainfall? So they are getting 40 inches of rainfall, Sean. Now think about that. You're in Alberta, like 40 inches of rainfall. That annual precipitation, that's through the roof. And David also says, and most of it comes during the growing season.
Wow.
And you're going like, right, thank you. Yes, that's huge. It's like, holy snap. Like, what are you talking then? Populations? Are you looking at 50,000 per acre or 45,000 per acre? Like that much rainfall, you got to be able to support high populations. Their standard population is 18,000 plants per acre. His high population that he's looking at is 30,000 plants per acre. And with that much rainfall, all the agronomists, the corn agronomists in North America, I bet you are saying, wow, man, like don't go to 30,000, go to 35, 40, maybe even try 45,000. But we're not in Kenya. And there's probably a reason they're starting at 18,000. And I know when I was in Zambia, a lot of the corn plants there will put out 2 cobs. They don't put out only one. The growers there want them to put out 2 cobs. So maybe that's part of it. Or maybe there's, heat stress, that there's some reason. But all of us are kind of saying, we want to hear those results because right now, the corn agronomists in North America are all betting huge on the 30,000 population because that's just, but it's such fun because it's agronomy in a different region. And Sean, I do this all the time, and I know wheat production principles. I know corn production, soybean production, but just because I know the physiology and how the plant works, you still have to take how that plant works and think through the impacts under those environmental conditions. And until you're there, man, you've got to be really careful how quickly you say, well, I know it'll happen this way, because it may not.
Well, I am sure there are many listeners across many geographies listening to this show right now that know of a situation where somebody moved into a different area than they were farming, and we're going to show all the locals how to do it. And watched a lot of adversity, and I'm just sort of envisioning this with not a lot of sympathy, but we can apply knowledge from other areas, but we also have to recognize and pay attention to some of those local, those local pieces that make it work, right? There's that local knowledge, or whether it's the soil type or the growing season, or when the frost tends to. There's just so many things, a long list, but you just can't take 100% of something and move it to another area.
No, but Sean, the other side of that coin is don't ignore the other area, because that's where you get the ideas that
100%.
may move you forward, right?
Yeah.
So there's actually, it's kind of cool. I went to Kansas. I talked about our nitrogen by fungicide synergy in winter wheat. So Romulo Lalato, he's the wheat extension agronomist at Kansas State University. He then starts doing research trials to see if that repeats in Kansas. And he's got some really cool data. It doesn't look like they get that synergy, but wow, the change in the curves still with and without fungicide was just amazing. So don't go into a new area and say, I'm going to show you guys how to do it, because you probably won't.
Yeah.
But when some Yahoo like Wheat Pete comes in and says, well, this works for us, just say, oh, maybe we could look at that in a plot and see if it works that way here too.
Yeah. Hey, I didn't even ask you, how was your long weekend?
Oh man, it was awesome. We managed to get Sunday off. I rarely take days off in seeding, but when it rained, Sunday was great. Monday was a cleanup day. I spent way too long through seeding and scouting season. My pickup truck just gets to be an absolute disaster. And Sean, I've learned if you're driving in a pigsty, it has a negative impact on your mental attitude. And I said, that pickup truck has got to get cleaned up, because I want to get in it and feel positive the way Wheat Pete always feels positive, instead of getting in and saying, oh, I got to clean this thing. So that's what we did. It took most of Monday afternoon, but we got her done.
Are you clean truck guy?
Not at all.
Because I'm not either. I got to be honest with you. I'm also not clean desk guy either.
I'm there on both fronts with you. But when the dust on the dash gets to be a 1/4 inch thick, there are limits to what I can tolerate, Sean.
I hear you. Hey, Pete, to wrap up, I know there was a lot of people in Ontario talking over the weekend about soil health pioneer Dave Brandt in his passing. I know that was something that I've seen a lot on Twitter. What are your thoughts?
So Dave was just he was a cover crop guru, a soil health innovator. He's just one of those guys that thought outside the box and really challenged everybody to do better and to think differently. And again, not everything that Dave did that worked for him will work for everybody, because your situation is different. But there wasn't many people out there who did more for soil health in terms of challenging everyone's thought processes and working on his own farm to improve soil health and find some of the answers. So a true icon in the industry, a horrendous loss, just a horrendous loss. He's going to be missed, because he was just one of those guys, and he'd talk to anybody about it, give them the information. I think he said once that he got about 20 requests a day all winter for presentations. He couldn't even come close to keeping up. So he that level of knowledge, that level of innovation and thought process is going to be missed.
Yeah, well put, Pete. Well put. Pete, thanks a lot for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it, and have yourself a great week, and we'll talk to you next Monday.
Thanks, Sean. You as well. It's been a blast. Get those Azuki beans in the ground. Dang it, it's time now.
Nice. Make sure everybody you download this week's episode of the Wheat Pete's Word podcast. New episode drops every single Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. The 2023 BIF Research Symposium and Convention will be held in Calgary, Alberta, July 3rd through the 6th. Featuring educational programming and networking opportunities with leaders within the industry, the technical breakout sessions will focus on a range of beef production and genetic improvement topics. To see a schedule and registration information, visit beefimprovement.org/symposium. Make sure you check that out. It's a great time to go to Calgary. Right? And take advantage of that convention rate on the hotel. I am sure they have one of those because Stampede time in Calgary, busy time in Calgary, Alberta, that first week of July. We're now going to talk about canola seeding, depth, and population. And recently on a Canola School episode, and the Canola School is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. Kara Oosterhuis of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with Rob MacDonald. He heads up their canola research area and does some great agronomic research.
Hi, I'm Rob MacDonald. I'm with BASF. I head our Agronomic Excellence Group. We're here in smoky southern Alberta near Strathmore. This canola field was seeded 9 days ago, and it's just coming out of the ground. So just a great time to have a look at our emergence. And I got a chance to show you some demonstration work we're doing with seed depth and the impact of seed depth. So these first 4 rows that we're looking at here in the field, this is all direct seeded and pretty dry conditions. We've only had a half an inch of rain for the season here so far. This first 4 rows here right in front of me, we've got some establishment here, but you can see it's quite patchy. A group of seeds here, lots of blank area, and if we dig one up, we'll see that our seeding depth here was right around a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch, so pretty short. And the challenge here, if we look a little closer at the dirt, we can see there's a bit of seed on the surface. So our establishment right now at this half inch is probably somewhere around 20%. So not very effective. And, our conditions weren't too bad at seeding. We were probably just touching the moisture to not quite. And we had significant dry down, lots of hot, dry winds since we seeded. So let's move over a couple more rows. And here we can see a pretty dramatic difference in the establishment. So we've got really nice establishment. In 4 inches, we've got about, as many as 4 plants. Our emergence here is probably closer to 75% seeded at Invigorate at 10 seeds per square foot. So we dig a plant up here to have a peek. And here we can see we're right at that inch to inch and a quarter. And that's, in this field, that was the sweet spot. Our moisture was right about 3/4 of an inch, but we don't target where the moisture is. We target below the moisture, where we want to get below the moisture to protect that developing plant. Another reason to get below, that, 3/4 to 1 inch zone is we also want to get out of this residue, because the residues, really, there's quite a bit of flax residue here, to at least 3/4 of an inch. And this is a terrible seed bed. The seeds desiccate very rapidly in there. We've got to get into the dirt. So that's really the goal with the deeper seeding. Now we can move over a few more rows. And we're getting a stand here as well. And, the plants come up. You can see Colleen's a little bit smaller. It's a little more delayed. There's still plants just coming up. And if we take one of these up, we can see, get a feel for how deep these ones are seeded. So we stretch this guy out 2 inches. So this coming up from 2 inches. So that's where we actually targeted, was 2-inch seeding depth. Deeper than I certainly ever like to seed. But we benefit here from warm soils at seeding. I think it was 8 degrees Celsius and down at 2 inches, believe it or not, when we seeded. And so we are getting plants out, but we'll lose stand here, and we're probably took another 2 days for the plants to emerge from that depth. So do we like seeding at 2 inches? No, we want to avoid it. And that's why I like to seed, get the seed in that inch and a quarter range.
And how do producers actually determine what's best for their field when it comes to seeding depth?
Well, there's a lot of factors to consider. But as I mentioned, moisture is number one. There's no point putting the seed in the dry soil and hoping it's going to rain. Hope's not a strategy. So a good strategy is to get below the moisture, as I mentioned, 1/4 inch, minimum 1/4 inch below that moisture to protect it, because you don't want to just germinate the seed, because, you can germinate the seed, the radicle comes poking out, and then if the soil dries down below that, it'll desiccate really rapidly. They're quite susceptible after they just germinate. So we need to protect them and get them in the ground. But another important strategy is control the depth with your drill as best as possible. And I mean that not just by setting the drill, but leveling the drill, making sure it's in good working order so that we minimize the amount of variance, because you can see the difference it makes seeding depth has on overall emergence. So we just want to tighten that up as much as possible. We'll actually go have a look at some emergence in this field here and show you what good looks like. In terms of seeding, what are you really trying to achieve? There's a few things we want to achieve through our seeding operation. One, we really want to get as uniform an emergence as possible. That just helps with the staging and consistency of the crop throughout the year. So what does that look like in terms of good? Well, if we have a look at this row here, we can look all the way down the row here, and we can see that pretty much every plant is similar in size. This all probably emerged within the same day. There's no one-leaf canola. It's all cotyledon canola. Probably ready to throw it its first leaf. Probably it's going to take a couple days in this smoke for it to move along quick enough to throw it the first leaf. But we want a really nice uniform stand like this. It's a really gorgeous stand. We've got probably 75% emergence here, which is great. And so we're right in the wheelhouse of getting that 5 to 7 plants. Here we have a solid 7 plants per foot. We've been out of the ground here for 2 days now on this site. The great news is we don't see any flea beetles yet. And we've been watching it close the last couple of days. Really worried about the beetles this year, but so far this field's pretty clean. Now we've moved up to a higher seed rate. Here we're seeding 15 seeds per square foot. And while looking down the row, it's pretty exciting. You see a lot of green and you think you've got a great catch here. But actually, we're a little too successful. In this foot of row space here, we got about 11 plants. And 11 plants is it's too many. You look at the spacing between these plants. There isn't even a half an inch between some of these plants here. And what happens when you get that high a density of plants is they'll actually compete with one another. And we'll see mortality between the plants and as they fight for light, space, and nutrients. So we don't want the canola to be that dense, because canola is a pretty aggressive growing plant. It likes to branch and likes to put out a decent stalk as well, which helps with the standability. So when you get them in this packed in this tight, while it looks attractive early in the spring, it doesn't represent an ideal population. That's why we really like to see the 5 to 7 plants for overall success. Every grower's got to decide on their specific conditions in the field, what their ideal seeding rate is. But what they want to really keep in mind when choosing their seeding rate is what target they have for population. And the research that we've done over the years has really shown that targeting 5 to 7 plants per square foot is really ideal for canola. So if we look at this particular row right here, we looking close here, I've got about a foot laid out here, and we've got 3 to 4 plants emerged in this foot, and we had excellent emergence in this field. This is all seeded, was seeded 1.25 inches, really excellent emergence, and this was seeded at 5 seeds per square foot. So we got 4 plants out of 5, so that's pretty good. That's 80% emergence. That's awesome. But 4 plants is just a bit on the low end. If we lose a plant to flea beetles, for example, now we're down to 3, and we know we get down to 3 plants, we're probably going to lose 20% of our yield. And that's a big risk to take. To seed, say, a half seed rate at 5 plants per square foot, you can bring it to crop, you can get it, you can get a decent yield, but it's not going to be optimum. And wow, you got to protect those plants and baby them to get them through. So it doesn't give you the safety margin that really would be ideal going into the season. You only get one chance to seed. It also, flea beetles, always top of mind this time of year. One thing we really saw last year was how our lower population stands really got impacted by flea beetles, because it's just a numbers game. There's so many flea beetles in the field, and there's so many plants. So if you have less plants, that's more flea beetles per plant. So that's more pressure on them. So when you get these big infestations, it's actually an advantage to have more plants, simply because there's more for them to feed on. So, bottom line is, you got to maintain your population.
That was Rob MacDonald from BASF. He's right. You only get one chance to seed. And again, reinforce. We talked about this with wheat a couple of weeks ago with Jeremy Boychin from Alberta Wheat Commission. You plan out your population, right? Obviously, your depth's a part of that in terms of the execution. Do the follow-up, do the counts as you go through the growing season to kind of be able to understand what you did, right? Because what happens early in the season, a month out of the ground, you may have a different reflection. And it's important to kind of, build that knowledge base, that those data points you can refer to as we get into the next year's growing season is probably the best way to put that. Make sure you check out the Canola School by going to canolaschool.com. As I mentioned, sponsored by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. There were some visuals there, so go to canolaschool.com. You can watch that video. That we played the audio for. I know it's not ideal for radio, but I really think there's some great information there from Rob as he walks you through the evaluation of some of those stands and those depths and what his thoughts are given those conditions. And he did mention the smokiness. Very smoky. You can see the smoke in the video. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio. We're going to get to the top ag news stories of the day right after this. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday. It's now time for the top ag news stories of the day, which is brought to you by Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. Okay, a little bit of time here to go through some of the top news stories. The Ford CEO. Now, have you been following this situation where Ford was looking at eliminating AM radios from some of its new vehicle lineup? Well, that impacts a lot of rural Canada, rural America, and there's a lot of campaigning happening, a lot from the broadcast industry, to be honest with you, not as much from farm groups. And Ford has reversed that decision. So Ford will go ahead and I guess reverse and have AM radio capability in some of the new models. And with some of the EVs, they're going to do a software update to bring it into some of their EVs that have already gone out without those AM radios. So honestly, I think it's a win for rural communities because for a lot of people, AM radio is really one of the options. Of course, a satellite as well as many of you are listening here on Rural Radio 147. The Economist has examined whether carbon removal can become a $1 trillion business. The oil industry's engagement with carbon removal is promising development. The article notes, noting that Occidental and ExxonMobil have substantial investments in the area, and other oil giants like Chevron, Equinor, and Wintershall have joined the fray. Critics argue that this is merely a reputation-saving move, but given the urgent need for carbon capture and the negative emissions, the involvement of these corporations with their vast resources and relevant expertise is generally seen as a positive step. So the point there, what the critics are saying is that basically, these companies, big emitters, pay for these credits, millions of dollars, to make up for some of their record on when it comes to emissions. And farmers trying to figure out how they're going to cash in on that. And based on the value it provides to those companies, you got to wonder if those credits should be worth a lot more. Understatement. Russia's largest potash and ammonium nitrate producer plans to open an ammonia export terminal near the Black Sea on the Taman Peninsula in southern Russia by the end of the year, according to the CEO in the interview with Reuters. This move is a response to the blockage of pipeline crossing Ukraine, which previously facilitated Russia ammonia shipments to Odessa. Russia was one of the largest fertilizer exporters in the world in 2021. Of course, there's all these sanctions that have been placed against Russian fertilizer as well. Now, speaking of trade, the container shipping market has really turned from where we have no containers, we have prices through the roof, to an absolute bust in very short order. Prices have fallen to the point where the big box ship lines are losing money on a once lucrative trans-Pacific route. The Wall Street Journal reports in a story that this is an ominous sign for the sector as the shipping industry approaches its peak season. Average daily freight rates from Asia to the U.S. West Coast across the Pacific are roughly $1,500 per 40-foot container. Now that compares to, it was more than $14,000 a year ago, according to the Freightos Baltic Index. The Asia to Europe rate is roughly at $1,400 compared with nearly $11,000 last year. And I think some of those levels are even down from where they were in the pandemic. Now, Bayer investors are going to get class status in a suit over the Monsanto deal risk. So here, this is interesting. So two pension funds, the Sheet Metal Workers National Pension Fund and the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Local 710 Pension Fund, have been granted class action status in a lawsuit against Bayer. They allege that the pharmaceutical company failed to adequately assess Monsanto Co., the maker of Roundup herbicide, before its acquisition, and did not warn investors about potential litigation risks linked to the cancer allegations. The pension funds allege that Bayer's due diligence failures led to a 26% loss in Bayer's secure in the stock, and $12.87 billion loss in market capitalization. That's a fascinating one to follow going forward. Now, and with the drought happening on the western half of the U.S. for the past number of years, the Colorado River Basin is a lot of talk about water supply. Okay, so the states bordering the Colorado River have reached an agreement with the Biden administration to voluntarily conserve a significant portion of their water supply in exchange for roughly $1 billion in federal funding. There's 40 million people that rely on the Colorado River. Okay, 7 U.S. states and parts of Mexico. We're talking about 5.5 million acres of farmland. 40 million people. That's more than the entire country of Canada. That's staggering. That's all the time we have for the top ag news stories today. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everyone, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.